After the introduction of Gilgamesh in the prologue, the story itself begins with the creation of the hero Enkidu. It's recounted that Gilgamesh has become arrogant and oppresses his own people, a claim that stands in striking contradiction to the highly laudatory description of him just presented in the prologue. The gods have a council, and it's decided that Aruru, the goddess of creation, should create Enkidu who can check Gilgamesh's arrogance and abuse of power, since there was no one in the city who could stand up to him. As in the creation story in Genesis chapter 2, verse 7, Enkidu is made of clay. Enkidu is described as a kind of wild man, living with the animals in the natural world. With regard to his physical appearance, quote, his body was rough, he had long hair, his body was covered with matted hair, end quote. He had no knowledge of any human culture. He's thus a nomadic hunter-gatherer with no experience of agriculture or sedentary life. His fellowship with animals is emphasized repeatedly. Quote, Enkidu ate grass in the hills with the gazelle and lurked with wild beasts at the water holes. He had joy of the water with the herds of wild game. He ranges over the hills with wild beasts and eats grass, end quote. He lives with the animals and they don't run from him. In short, although Enkidu has the physical form of a human being, he's in fact, in a sense, an animal. He's not yet become truly human. Enkidu thus represents nature in contrast to civilization. Enkidu is in the same condition as Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden before the fall. They too are at one with nature and the animals. All of their needs are provided for by their immediate natural surroundings, as in the case with the animals. Since Enkidu is a frightening figure, it's decided that he should be tamed and brought, so to speak, into the human fold. This is done in a very interesting way. A prostitute is taken from Ishtar's Temple of Love and is brought in to seduce him. After this is accomplished, a change takes place in Enkidu. He's no longer at one with nature. He tries to return to the wild, but now the animals run away from him, as they do from all humans. He's no longer one of them, but something different, a human being. This change is also accompanied by a new knowledge or insight. Quote, for wisdom was in him, and the thoughts of a man were in his heart, end quote. Although some of the details differ, this story of Enkidu has many similarities with that of the fall in Genesis chapter 3. In both cases, there was a preliminary condition where the humans were like the animals and were a part of nature. They didn't know that they were naked. Then, through the seduction of a woman, a change takes place, and they suddenly become self-conscious human beings, realizing that they are separate and different from nature. Now they feel the shame of being naked and the need to wear clothes. This new self-awareness is a kind of wisdom which makes them like God. In Genesis, the serpent says to Eve, quote, God knows that when you eat of the tree, your eyes will be open, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil. This is no deception, since it's confirmed later by God himself. In Gilgamesh, the prostitute says to Enkidu, quote, you are wise, Enkidu, and now you have become like a god. Later she says, quote, when I look at you, you have become like a god. The similarities in the two accounts are impossible to overlook. The prostitute teaches him the ways of human beings. He learns to eat bread, drink wine, and wear clothes. In the end, it's concluded, quote, Enkidu had become a man, end quote. The point here is clearly that to be a man means to have human culture. Although he had the form and body of a man in nature, Enkidu was not yet fully human in his previous existence. This was something that he had to learn. Just as children have to be taught the ways of life through many years of upbringing, so also Enkidu had to learn. Puberty and the new awareness of sexual desire marks an important shift in human development, signaling the end of childhood and the beginning of adult life. With this new development, a new self-consciousness arises in each individual. Thus, the story in both Genesis and Gilgamesh is portrayed in terms of sexuality, albeit in a metaphorical form in the former. In both cases, it's women who seduce the men and thus inaugurate the change to adulthood and a fully human life. Moreover, puberty is also the time when young people become fully aware of their mortality and the inevitability of their own death, something that small children don't fully grasp. This is also something that has been pointed to as a distinction between human beings and animals who presumably also do not fully know that they will die. Humans, by contrast, reach a stage in their development when they know this, and this awareness haunts them for the rest of their lives. Thus, it makes sense that the result of the fall is that people become mortal, as is the case in Genesis, where this is a part of God's punishment of Adam and Eve. The vexation and despair caused by the awareness of human mortality can be seen as a central motif and problem of Gilgamesh. In Genesis, the story of the fall is portrayed as a great catastrophe, and there is a hint of this as well in the Mesopotamian epic. While it's positive that Enkidu emerges from his life as an animal and becomes fully human, later, when he becomes ill and knows that he's dying, he comes to curse the circumstances that brought him into his new condition. There, he yearns to return to his former life as an animal, free from knowledge of death. The first chapter ends with the fulfillment of the god's plan, as Enkidu comes to the city of Uruk and prevents Gilgamesh from oppressing his people by sleeping with new brides, a practice known in medieval Europe as the prima nocte, that is the first night, or in French, droit du seigneur, that is the right of the lord or master. Gilgamesh can only be stopped by a great fight, but despite this, he befriends Enkidu, and they become like brothers. So oddly, Enkidu, the man who had only just become civilized, is the defender of human custom and the sanctity of marriage.